All right, so our last section on type for this week is about converting type to a graphic object, and then a couple little formatting tips and tricks. So, a graphic object is a regular vector shape, true vector shapes, paths. Type is registering as vector shapes on this. You can create type in here and make it as big as you want, and you can zoom in as much as you want, and it is a vector in that sense. But it's not a vector in the true vector sense where we have these paths that we can say apply gradients to and that kind of thing, right? So when you want to convert it, you can just use, as we mentioned before, the has to be selected, but you can use the type create outlines choice here in the type menu. The first thing I usually want to do though when I'm going to do that is make a font that is thicker than this one. So I'm going to look in here and see if I can find something a little bit better for us. Impact's a good one. That one's nice and thick, so we'll pick that one. Um, Usually when I'm making something be permanently a graphic object, I like to make a backup copy of it just in case I decide or my client decides that they want to change what the wording was. So I have this kind of styled already to the size and shape I wanted it to be. So I say copy paste. I just take that and toss it off to the side. You could take it and put it on a different layer, lock it, hide it, that kind of thing. I could even do that here. I could lock this and hide it so it's not showing. Oops, wrong one, right? There we go. Um, but for now, since it's in my scratch space, I'm just going to leave it over there so that I know that I have it. Uh, Once I do this, type, nothing's highlighted again. Here we go. Type, create outlines. And this converts, as you can see, all of a sudden it's highlighted all the way around it in pink. Has tons of little paths and little anchor points on it. Definitely not type anymore. So if I zoom in on this, you can get a closer look at it. And if you go and look at this actually in your appearance panel, you can see that it says that it's a group. And if I double click into here, I'll get a compound path. These have made compound paths. Uh, Compound paths can usually be released. You'll see down here. But if you release one that has hollow inside, like an E, like the center of the E has a hollow part, and you release it, that will fill in because compound paths are using the each shape to knock little pieces out of it mathematically. So now it actually is two separate pieces, and they're both solid colors. So just be aware of that. Let's see here. What else can you do with this? So now you've got, like we have seen before, you've got your stroke and your fill on this. Oops, let's get back out here to this. Um, so you can apply a stroke to it. The stroke can be a different color. You can apply gradients to it. Do I have a gradient in here? There we go. So all sorts of fun that way. You could also modify it using your other tools, your skews and your rotates and scales. Uh, you can put other shapes on it. You can apply special effects that you maybe couldn't apply before. I could put type on a path on this, right? As long as it's not a compound path. Oh, it is a compound path. So, oops. Type on a path won't go on compound paths. However, I'm going to move this over to the side a little bit. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. And I'm actually going to release its compound path. It doesn't have a hollow point, so if I release it, it will just be an L, and it becomes a path. And now that it's a path, I can do type on a path on it. All right, click here. Ooh, and that's really giant for that. So let's make this smaller. 10 point maybe. We'll try it again. Uh, let's size it first. There we go. Click on that. And now there's text around my letter. So, it's letter shaped text, sort of. You could move this in, give it some different spacing. so that it goes inside of it or looks more like the L shape, like that. What else can you do with it? You can change any part of the character. So when you're using fonts out in the real world, um, you usually have to pay for them if you're actually going to use them for something professional. If you're just some small mom and pop operation, you're probably not going to need to worry about that. But if you are a famous company, big company, then you have to pay for your fonts. And if you uh, don't want to pay for it, you can make your own fonts. Obviously, there are ways to actually make fonts. That's a whole separate class and amount of time. But you can come into these, and with your direct selection tool, you can grab little anchor points and move them out and make your own font. So you can find a base font that you want to start with, and then you can, make this little funky disco font with little bell-bottom pants. So you can modify any little portions of this that you want. It's got these little pull-out parts, so you can try to see if you can straighten things out. There, might not work. Curve things in. Nope, those aren't working too well. There's too many anchor points for it to really work well for that. Um, but as you can see, I'm actually modifying this, and then it's not that font anymore. So when you're done and you've got these letters squished together or not, you've created a whole new font for yourself. So that's a really good reason to use the graphic outlines. Another good reason is that you're sending this to a client as a PDF, and PDFs can actually hold fonts in them. So it's possible that you send it to them and they don't have that font on their computer, and it will actually shift, and you won't be able to see it the way that you see it. The font will shift. So if you convert it to outlines like this, then it is not a font anymore, and their computer will see it the way that you had it laid out. Um, Same thing goes for some print shops. I worked with one once where they only had access to certain fonts. It was for making badges, so it was a very specific print shop, not just a general one. And they didn't have access to all the different kinds of fonts. And the font that we wanted to use, they did not have. And so if you convert it to outlines, then it doesn't matter. They can print whatever, because then it's just a picture for them to be printing. So lots of different reasons why you might want to convert type to a graphic object. Especially again, if you want to use some effects. Some of these effects work differently on uh, fonts than they do on vector objects than they do on raster objects. And so there actually is an option here to rasterize um, your objects, your vector objects, to make them pixelated, so the the effects will work differently on them. So just be aware of that. There's lots that is going on there. All right. What else here? Back to this. Our last little section here is about formatting tips and tricks. Again, some of this stuff we'll go into more next week, because we're going to get more into the character and paragraph panels. But let's see. So one of the little tricks that you can do is that if you have a font that is skinny that you really want to use, let's pick Myriad Pro. So I want to use this font, but it's a little bit too skinny for what I want to do. You can give it a fake bold, and some of these don't have a bold option. So you'll do a drop down here, and there won't be all these different fancy options for it, for bold and whatnot. So if they don't have the bold option, you can actually use a stroke and add it on there to make it look a little bit thicker. Be aware that if you then convert that to outlines, that becomes a shape within a shape. So you can see that they're both the stroke is still there. So it's not, if I wanted to say put a gradient across that whole thickness, for example, it wouldn't work because the stroke is still on there. It still has registered it as something that is thin. So it didn't convert the same way. The stroke didn't convert with the font when it changed. Try this back. There we go. Also, if you want to affect these things, you'll see over here that there is a character panel and a paragraph panel that has come up here. These are the shortened versions of these panels. The longer ones are under the ... but they do stay attached over here. Same thing with the paragraph panel. If you want them to be loose, you need to go up to your window menu. Anything that has to do with type is under type, so T for type versus C for character. So no character panel here. You have to go all the way down to the bottom of the type, and then you have character styles, which are ways that you can save the characters, um, settings that you've created, glyphs, open type, paragraph styles. You can save the paragraph settings you've done, and tabs. So all these are under here. They allow you to change your font, your size, spacing, alignment, all that kind of stuff. Um, Open type down here allows you to have, oh, you can now select stylistic sets from the open type panel. This is a new thing here on the end. Apparently not for all the fonts because the Myriad Pro one, it's not lighting up. But you can click that if you want, if it comes up, and learn a little bit more about that. But you can see from this that each font has its own set of things, and they will do certain things like make ordinals and fractions and whatnot. And again, we'll go over this more next week, but there are options in here for open type fonts. Fonts that are open type have this O next to them. TT, that is not an open type font, and these will all be grayed out. You can see on that one. And these open type var ones, it's a variable. I'm not sure about those, what they would have on them, because they are these newer variations that they have for some fonts. What else? If you do set all your text up this way, so I've done this crazy thing to this text, and I go over here, and I just had to make some new text, it will retain that information. It made it 10 point, you can see, because I had upsized this, but it is using that same font. So be aware that anything that you set over here will apply to the next thing that you open for a font. So if you're trying to be consistent about your fonts, then maybe you want to, and you had a couple of them, you might want to just click really quickly on one of the other ones that you wanted to use, and then make your new font area from that, so it takes that font as opposed to the one that was down below, if that makes sense. um, Scaling type objects with the transform tools will also adjust the character height and width, meaning we'll use this one. So scale came up, preview. If I say 200%, it does take it up evenly. If I say non-uniform and say 300%, it does stretch it out. And that actually changes the sizing of the font, which would be in the larger part of the character panel here. You can see that this is now at 150% horizontal scale versus 100% vertical scale, so it actually did stretch it out. So transforming does affect the settings in here, and they can be reset in here, so I can take this back down to 100%, for example, and it makes it even again. Special symbols can be inserted by double-clicking on the type glyphs. So window, oops, I'm selected on this here, deselect, window, type, glyphs. This gives you all the special characters that a font might have. Different fonts have different special characters, so be aware of that. If you don't see a character you're looking for, check a different font. Maybe it's in there. Most of them have the typical ones of dollar signs and copyrights and that kind of thing, but some of them also have other fancier things. Let's see what we have here. So Arial's got some other little markers and some fancy little glyphs in here, that kind of thing, little shapes. If you want to insert one of these, you just need to be in your text somewhere. So I'm right here on my text with the blinking cursor, and I can pick one of these fancy little shapes, double click it, and it will insert it for me. All right. If you're on a Mac, there also is the ability to, you'll see up top here, this is the keyboard preferences, and it actually will show me a keyboard viewer up here, so I can open this up and pick glyphs myself based off of, if you're holding down extra keys, you'll see the different glyphs come up for those when I do that. And also, if I show emoji and symbols, the emoji part is new, but again, you can come in here and you can find arrows and currency symbols and It's gonna lock up. Let me. Sorry. Hopefully my audio didn't go out there where that started spinning, but you can get lots of little fancy symbols in here as well. So it's the same kind of thing there, but this is for all of your computer. So just a little FYI for you on that. I did not know if there's a similar one on the PC. I'm just aware of it being there on the Mac. The last thing you can do here, you can also apply a warp to items. And as you may recall, we have applied warps before. Let me get back to a more regular font here. When we did the parrots, we went up here and went to warp, and we did arcs or bulges, whatever you wanted to do. There is another way to do those, and that is to do them over here in the object menu with an envelope distort, however you want to say it. You can say make with warp, and it will bend your text. It will pick arc, lower, upper, bulge, wave, whatever you want to pick. And then when you're done with that, you can actually come over here and it actually has made little anchor points on the side. So if I switch to my direct selection tool, I can pick these anchor points and modify them. So you can actually, this is like the Cheshire Cat thing I showed you guys back in the beginning. This is how that text was warped. So you can actually play around with the little handles here and swirl your text and do lots of little fun things with it. So be aware that this is possible. Once you've done this to your text, it's a little bit more difficult to modify it in general. You'll see that if I try to apply a stroke to it, that's not taking effect. If I go and look at my appearance, it says that it's inside of an envelope. I can double click on the contents and then I'm inside of a mesh. So all that's kind of just not working. It's not allowing me to go back and change the warp anymore. The warp is kind of permanent from this direction. I can come in here and double click in here and change the letters if I want to. And when I'm back out of that on the outside, you'll see that these envelope options come up here. So I can click on those and see how the shape is being used in there and affect some of that. And a minute ago it had some more options here for a mesh, but maybe since I changed the type, it lost that one. So again, a little bit more difficult to go back and alter. So you might want to save your text out with a side copy before you start messing around with like this. Be where you might have to go back and change it to try a new warp, that kind of thing. But you can do some fancy things with your text that way and modify it. All right, so those are some little type formatting tips and tricks, and that is all for this week. We'll get back into more type objects soon. Next week, I believe. Maybe it's the week after. I think it's next week. And I will see you all then.